Good afternoon. Welcome to the Big Show. The Big Show brought to you here every single day. We talk about whatever goes on in the world of sports, mostly the Steelers. And, of course, we like to keep you a post as each day goes by. We're brought to you by FanDuel Casino. Of course, FanDuel, we'd like to thank FanDuel. And, of course, we will talk a little bit about the number of things that FanDuel can do, or, different ways you can utilize FanDuel. Especially with the Super Bowl coming up, I'm sure lots of you would love to do that kind of thing. But first up, we're talking about the Steelers, and of course, that would mean the coaching staff, which is slowly but surely coming together. And I do think it is really kind of telling that they have done a pretty good job, and I'm talking about Mike McCarthy and company, of trying to get a mix of older guys and younger guys. There are a number of people who probably are a little bit nervous by the fact that all of these hires seem to be guys who have some sort of a connection to McCarthy or to Pittsburgh. There's a lot of guys that are being hired, obviously, that worked with McCarthy before. But, the reality is, that's not really that different. That's really not that different with respect to most guys that get hired. And I think that's, what should be noted here. Like, a lot of guys get hired, and what do? They turn to their Rolodex, to coaches that they've worked with before, coaches that they're familiar with, or coaches that come recommended to them by some people they trust. And those are the guys they hire. Those are the guys they go after. Does it feel like it's excessive a little bit with the Steelers here? Probably. But again, I think we're probably more aware of it because, we're familiar a lot with Mike McCarthy and all of the guys that he's familiar with. I mean, it's kind of funny, but we were, trying to guess who would be on his staff. If you'd have said, hey, give me 5 coaches that are going to be on his staff, I mean, for the most part, there's only one guy that I would have guessed that has not yet been hired, and I would stress that the bottom line is he could still be hired, and I think that's the key. So people are getting a little bit nervous because it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Now, Brian Angelico was hired today as the offensive coordinator, quote unquote. And I think one of the reasons why that's pretty significant is because obviously you get to hire 2 coordinators, your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator. And there were a lot of people that thought, well, because Mike McCarthy is going to call the plays and sort of design the offense, the defensive coordinator is more important. Who are they going to hire for that? Who is he going to go get for that? Well, I would agree to some degree, because obviously the defensive coordinator probably will have more autonomy and a lot more to say about the defense than the quote-unquote offensive coordinator. But I also thought the offensive coordinator hire was going to be pretty important. And here's why. If McCarthy calls the plays, which he's going to, and if he sort of is the architect of the offense, which he will be, and he's going to try and be, the head coach, which that's his job, if he's going to do that, it's a big job to be the head coach, to worry about the entire team, to worry about everything that goes on, with your team. That's a really big job. And I think what that is so important, that you have to make sure that you're not spending too much time on any one piece or any one endeavor. And I think that's where it comes down to, really important things like who is going to be your offensive coordinator, because Your offensive coordinator has got to be somebody who's a grinder. It's got to be somebody who's a grinder, who's going to work hard, who's going to be able to, do all the nuts and bolts and installing of your, game plan and all that other good stuff. It's going to have to be somebody who knows your offense in and out and who's a hard worker that doesn't mind being a little bit of a behind-the-scenes guy. I can tell you Brian Angelico is perfect for the job. I got to know him a little bit. He worked on Dave Wannstedt's staff at Pitt from like 2006 to say 2010. He was the tight ends coach for Dave, but he was also sort of like the assistant offensive coordinator. And I got to know him really well over those 4 years. And the thing about him is two things. One, probably most important, he's a grinder. He's a worker. He's a guy that watches a lot of film. He's one of those people that we sort of describe as a football head, where he doesn't have, a bunch of other hobbies and outside interests and things of such. He likes to be a football coach. He loves to be in the film. He loves to be, breaking things down, and he loves to study other offenses and all that other good stuff. He's a football head, man. So that's number one. Number two, he's a worker. He's not quite a sleeps in the office guy, but at times he was probably a sleeps in the office guy. Like, he's a worker. He is somebody who will put in the time. And the other part of it is he's very good at actually breaking down and teaching offense to players. And people say, well, what about developing players? Well, I mean, I'd give you the poster child for that. Doran Dickerson got recruited to Pitt. He was an All-American, in high school, one of the top players coming out of, high school. Offers from USC, Alabama, everybody else in between. He went to Pitt because of Dave Wannstedt. His first year, he was a running back, and, he had a red shirt. He hurt his ankle, and he just never really fit in. And then, he became like a receiver, but it didn't fit there. And then he was an inside linebacker, and it just wasn't fitting what he does. And so then all of a sudden, going into his junior year, they moved him to tight end. Angelico was his position coach. Frank Cignetti, who, by the way, just got hired again today as senior offensive assistant or something for the Steelers. But Frank Cignetti was the offensive coordinator. And the thing about it is he became, an All-American, obviously went and got drafted, played in the NFL. He was really – but Brian Angelico was very instrumental in making sure that they built an offense around Doran's talents and build an offense around what he does well. And I think that's, one of those things where it's really important that is sort of what he is as a coach. And so he knows the offense really well because he worked for McCarthy in Green Bay. He understands the offense really well. He understands what Mike McCarthy wants in the offense. And so he's, to me, somebody that I would call like a really good hire. I know there are a lot of people who are saying, just another Pittsburgh guy, Wanney assistant, McCarthy assistant, blah, 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 blah. No, that doesn't matter here because I think he's exactly the kind of guy you should hire if you're an offensive coordinator or if you're a defensive coordinator that wants to call your defensive plays. I mean, that's what I would say. It is going to be one of those things for it, if you want to make your staff good, you have to have balance. Patrick Graham is the defensive coordinator. He'll be able to go out and probably do some good things with the defense. It'll be interesting to see if they'll allow him to, sort of tinker with, for instance, what they do with TJ Watt. And, what they do with some of their outside linebackers in certain schemes and certain formations. It'll be interesting to see how much he really has. But the flip side of it to me is if you look at what they've done, they have tried to balance the staff. And they've hired a couple of young guys, too, that are, quality control coaches or whatever you want to call them. And, the staff is probably going to end up the biggest staff the Steelers have ever had. And there's a lot of people that said basically, well, Mike Tomlin, he was hamstrung. He was hamstrung because, he had a small staff because the Rooneys are cheap. Well, if you listen to Mike Tomlin, he had a small staff because he wanted a small staff. His exact words were, I'd rather overwork coaches than underwork them. I'd rather have coaches have too much on their plate than not enough. I'd rather have coaches who have to, for instance, stay a little longer, work a little bit harder, and all that other stuff than coaches who are sitting around with not a whole lot to do because we've got 30 of them on the staff. I don't want that. Mike Tomlin's never wanted that. He could have hired more guys, right? I mean, he really could have. But, and I'll tell you the evidence that I have that he could have. When he created a spot for Brian Flores. Do you remember that? Brian Flores sues the NFL, sues the Dolphins, sues the Giants. Brian Flores is on the verge of being a guy who gets blackballed, basically. And Mike Tomlin threw him a lifeline. And he went into Rooney. If you listen to the story, he went into Rooney's office and said, basically, listen, I would like to hire Brian Flores. And Rooney said, great. In other words, I never bought the idea that the reason that staff under Mike Tomlin was so small is because the Rooneys were cheap and didn't want to pay assistants. Because Mike Tomlin made it very clear. That's where it is. I mean, Mike Tomlin made it very clear it was his choice to have a small staff. So now, if you look at what they're doing, they're probably going to have the largest staff they've ever had. I mean, I just saw they hired an assistant offensive line coach, but they also hired an inside linebackers coach or something. But they hired a couple of like for instance, Frank Signetti is his title is something like senior offensive assistant or something. I see that they hired at least one quality control guy. I mean, they're doing it differently. Period. They're doing it differently than they have in the past. And maybe that was Rooney saying to him, listen, you need to basically go hire guys because, our staff probably wasn't big enough. Probably was too much work for these guys. So, former defensive coordinator Joe Witt, he was in Washington, I think was his last stop. He's now the assistant head coach and secondary coach. I'm going to assume, when you look at some of the other guys they hire, Frank Signetti's the senior offensive assistant. They hired their special teams coach. So they now have Danny Crossman as their new special teams coordinator. They hired a chief of staff. I don't know if they've ever had a chief of staff. They've got a defensive quality control coach, like I said. So you look at each of the pieces that they have, they're adding coaches. Right now, they haven't even really got started. Well, I guess they're started, but they haven't really, even really started to turn the corner yet. And they've got what, 2, 4, 6, 7, 2, 4, so that's 14. They already have 16 coaches hired. Mike Tomlin only had 18 coaches. Mike Tomlin only had 18 coaches. So, they're going to have to find a couple more coaches, but it won't shock me if we're talking about them having 22, 23, 24 coaches by the time this is all said and done. And that's how most modern staffs are. That's really what it comes down to. And I think when you look at what the Steelers are trying to do, it becomes very important to see who they hire to finish their staff. But I think they have an opportunity. I really do. Someone sent me an email and basically was like, oh, well, the Steelers, they beat the Patriots. So that proves, that proves that they aren't that far away. That proves that they're right there. I mean, it shows that, a couple of bounces of the ball here and there, and they could be the team that's in the Super Bowl. To which I would tell you, if that's really what you think, you're probably smoking too much wacky tobacco, okay? Let's get real. You're probably on the hippie lettuce a little too hard. And what's funny is the week before that, they played Seattle reasonably well before Seattle pulled away at the end. So my thing with that is it is irrelevant. Regular season is regular season. The playoffs are the playoffs. And in this case, I think it's really kind of funny to me. It's really kind of funny to me. People don't understand that. They don't understand the difference between the two. They don't understand that just because you play well in one regular season game, it's just one of those things where I tell you that, I mean, if that's really, it's just really not all that relevant, because I feel like it's just one of those things where you can't take a look at one game, especially a game where it is so much an outlier that they won the game based on the turnovers and everything else. And hang on one second. That's one of those things where I feel like if you really look at the big picture, that Patriots game wasn't very relevant. Neither was the Seattle game. They were early in the season. The Patriots turned it over, 5 or 6 times, and probably still should have won the game. The Steelers were okay. They were okay this year. They were just okay. They weren't great. They weren't horrible. They were just okay. That's where I would tell you it's just, kind of thing. It's one of those things where that game was just a product of Drake Maye still looked like a rookie quarterback, still made some mistakes. They fumbled the ball, they moved the ball, and they did all kinds of stuff where it was clear they were the better team. They just turned it over. But the Steelers did play both teams. And I'll tell you, watching both games, I think it's pretty clear to me that Seattle is the better team of the two. I do. I know that, they're favored. I know a lot of people are on them. And I love people in these games. They love to pick the underdog, and root for the underdog. But I don't know, man. I look at Seattle. I remember when Seattle played the Steelers. I remember when the Patriots played the Steelers. I remember watching the games over the last few months. I don't see how the Patriots are going to win this game unless Seattle hands it to them. I could be wrong, but it seems like it's going to be a matchup game, and I don't know that necessarily favors the Patriots. Now then, as a side note, you want to talk about how you can maybe cost yourself millions by being an idiot? So Gavin McKenna, who there are a lot of people that wanted the Penguins to be in position to be able to draft him, if you remember. I mean, he's going to be he should be the number 1 pick in the draft. He hasn't had a great year, though, at Penn State. He's been okay. And now this. Gavin McKenna has been charged with a felony assault. Last few days, we looked into reports. Gavin McKenna broke the jaw of a kid who was chirping at him after he was asked to leave Augie's Pub on Saturday night. Been charged with aggravated assault and 3 other things. And so now let's see if I can pull up what the other three charges are. Simple assault looks like one of them. Hang on, let's see. I'm trying to read the affidavit here real quick. So again, a guy that probably cost himself millions, to be honest, if you think about it. Maybe. But my thing is always the same with these stories. Why? Why, if you're him, are you getting involved in a brawl after hours out in State College? And I know you can say, well, it sounds like the other guy started it and all this other stuff. The other guy doesn't have anything to lose. Like I tell people all the time, the other guy doesn't have anything to lose. The smartest athletes have been the ones, and, don't tell me that this kid can't afford it because, again, I guarantee you with his NIL money and everything else, he's making a lot of money. This kid can't. This kid can't, get in this kind of trouble. Not with the draft coming up. Not when he's supposed to be the first name picked off the board. Not when he makes enough money now that he should be able to handle the fact that maybe you hire somebody just to be your quote-unquote bodyguard. It doesn't have to be a professional bodyguard, but, somebody that's going to handle this kind of stuff for you. I don't understand why these guys, why they do this, why these athletes do this. It's doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It really doesn't. It's one of those situations where, if you think about it, I would love to know what goes through your head when you're, getting into a fight, when you're getting ready to be the number one guy drafted into the NHL. Go hire somebody to be a guy to handle this kind of nonsense and foolishness. Really don't understand it at all. I feel like it's one of those things where you have to be smarter than this. Gavin McKenna, there was a lot of people saying, well, they really wish that they really, really wish that there is, a situation of where the Penguins could get up into the top 5 and then be able to, draft this kid. Well, it's not that simple. It really is not that simple, because the reality is they've got to, lose a bunch of games and then win the lottery. But it sounds like if this kid keeps doing what he's doing recently, it sounds to me like there might not actually be, the Penguins might not have to trade up for him because he's dumb. I don't know. I just don't understand how you get to where he's at right now. To where now he's got to answer a bunch of questions and figure out, if he's going to, have this felony hanging over his head and all that other stuff. I think it's one of those things where it feels a lot like, this is a kid that just cost himself a lot of money needlessly. And I think that's one of the biggest things I will say is needlessly. You have to really be smarter than this. And some of these guys just aren't. They're not very smart at all. Anyway, there's that. By the way, if you look at the Super Bowl, I'll give you a few thoughts on FanDuel. You go to your FanDuel app, download the FanDuel app, and you can bet on the Super Bowl. Really, you can bet on just about anything you want to bet on when it comes to the NFL or NBA or NHL or whatever. But right now, the line is held pretty steady at 4.5 in favor of the Seahawks. Over/under is 45.5. Honestly, it's a Super Bowl. I think it's probably going to go over just because they always do. But I could also see a situation of where Seattle blows out New England and New England can't score against them. That defense is for real. No, Seattle's, I mean. So, to me, go to your FanDuel app. You want to download, you want to download the FanDuel app. You want to go take a look at whatever the offerings are. There's a lot of prop bets, too. One of my favorite prop bets always. One of my favorite prop bet, always is just kind of a thing where I like to bet the over 2.5 players to throw a touchdown pass. Because it always seems like there's one of those goofball plays, doesn't it? Where, the receiver, reverse or something, the receiver. There's always one of those, plays where somebody throws a pass that's not a quarterback. So I always like to say over 2.5 players to throw a pass or complete a pass. That's always a fun one for me. And in this game, I could easily see either of these coaches throwing one of those plays in. We'll probably break down the Super Bowl a lot more tomorrow than we did today. And it's our last show before the Super Bowl. So we'll get ready to have a good time. We'll talk about all of the prop bets we can find and just have a good time tomorrow talking football. Until such time that we meet again.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.